The binder hit the table before the chamber had finished settling. No announcement, no gesture toward the gallery, just the soft, flat sound of dark blue fabric on black basalt, and a man folding his hands on top of it like he had all the time the council did not. Yesin IV, junior clerk of the tribunal secretariat, was sitting in the gallery of the conclave chamber on Varath Station when it happened. He had attended 212 sessions before this one. He had a stylus in his right hand and a recording tablet on his knee. His stylus was already still. That was wrong. Yesin IV's stylus was never still, not once in 212 sessions. He had not written a single word in 4 minutes. 31 delegations sat in the horseshoe below him, and not one of them spoke. The chamber had gone quiet in a way Yesin IV did not have a word for in either of his native languages. Not tense, not afraid, something more like the moment before a calculation resolves, when every number is loaded and the answer has not appeared yet, but you can feel that it will change something. The man at the floor-level podium had both hands flat on a dark blue binder. He was not looking at anyone. He was waiting. Across the horseshoe, at the top tier, Ambassador Councillor Drevath of the Keth sovereignty sat elevated by 3 full steps of basalt and 312 years of institutional seniority. His translator bead caught the ambient silence and returned nothing. His 2 aides, flanking him, were also still. 1, 2, 3. Yesin IV was counting seconds. He would not know why until later. No speech, no gesture, no answer. The chamber held. 4, 5. The man at the floor-level podium turned 1 page of the binder. The sound was very small in a very large room. 6. Stay close. He still had 173 pages left. Session 1847 had opened the way all sessions opened, with a procedural announcement that echoed off 40 meters of ceiling and landed on delegations that were already checking their secondary screens. Yesin IV arrived at the gallery 12 minutes early, as always. He set his tablet on his knee, pressed his stylus to the first line of his notation record, and wrote the session number and the standard header. He was Pethari, small, paper-skinned, trained from childhood in the art of being present without being noticed. His species had served as administrative staff to the council for 6 generations. They were good at it. They sat in galleries and wrote things down and did not speak unless spoken to. This was his 213th session. He had never seen anything worth stopping for. The treaty on today's agenda was an infrastructure expansion package. 17 clauses, signal relay placement rights, maintenance corridors, dormancy protocols, a secondary ratification clause about fee structures. The kind of treaty that senior delegates assigned to junior staff, who assigned it to automated review systems, which flagged nothing because the systems were built by the species who had written the treaty. 30 delegations had approved it, on average 11 days each. The Keth sovereignty who had drafted it approved it in 4 hours. The Keth needed it ratified before their fiscal cycle closed. 14 days remained. 1 delegation had not approved it. The human delegation had submitted, across 9 months, 214 procedural queries. Yesin IV had read the query log the night before. He found the queries detailed, specific, in ways that suggested either deep competence or deep anxiety. He had not decided which. He made a note of the number because he liked numbers. He did not expect the number to matter. Below him, delegations settled into their seats. The chamber's environmental system adjusted the air to the standard 11-species blend, a compromise that satisfied no one and offended no one, which Yesin IV had always thought was a reasonable working definition of diplomacy. Ambassador Councillor Drevath arrived last. Senior members often did. He took his seat at the top tier. The Keth had held that position for 312 years since the chamber was built, and he did not look at the human podium when he sat down. His 2 aides flanked him. One opened a data screen. The other poured something into a small vessel and offered it. Drevath did not take it. Drevath was impatient. Yesin IV could read impatience in 31 species, and Drevath's was the Keth variety, precise, coiled, expressed in the angle of the upper body and the speed of blinking. 14 days. A fiscal cycle. 9 months of queries from a delegation 61 years into its membership. The human podium sat at the far end of Yesin 4 sight line floor level at the base of the horseshoe's curve, added 61 years ago when humanity joined the council. The decision to place it at floor level had not been an oversight. There had been a vote, 22 in favor, 4 opposed, 5 abstaining. Aurelio Ven sat at the floor-level podium. He had arrived before everyone, including Yesin 4, which was unusual for a senior delegate. He had a worn carry case beside his chair and 2 aides seated slightly behind him. He had not opened his screen. His hands were flat on the table, and he was looking at the center of the horseshoe with the patient, focused attention of a man who had spent a long time in rooms that were not comfortable and had stopped expecting them to be. He had said very little in 6 months. The session opened with the chair calling the treaty to the floor. Standard procedure. Drafting delegation presence. Floor opens for final comment. Vote called. Drevath did not wait for the floor to formally open. He rose, which from the top tier meant rising above the sight lines of half the chamber, and he spoke not to the chair but to the room. His translator bead converted Keth tonal language into standard, which it always rendered flat and clipped, making polite things sound precise and precise things sound final. The chair will forgive a brief procedural observation, Drevath said. This treaty has been under review for 9 months. 30 delegations have completed their review and recorded approval. 1 has not. In that time, the human delegation has submitted 214 procedural queries. He paused. Keth pauses were not natural, they were placed. This one was placed to let the number land. 214, Drevath said again. Queries about relay placement, queries about dormancy definitions, queries about subclause jurisdiction, queries about the queries. Another pause, smaller. We are not required to educate members on the basics of interstellar infrastructure. We are required to govern. If the human delegation cannot engage with a framework that 30 other delegations reviewed and approved, a framework drafted to the highest standards of the Keth sovereignty's legal office, perhaps the human delegation should consider whether this chamber is the correct venue for its learning process. The chamber went quiet, not the loud quiet of shock, the quieter quiet of 30 delegations deciding not to respond to something they were not sure they disagreed with, the sound of complicity arriving on small, careful feet. Yesin 4 watched Aurelio Ven. Ven did not stand. He did not straighten in his chair. He did not look at his aides or at Drevath. He folded his hands on the table in front of him, slowly, the deliberate movement of a man who has decided his next action and is in no hurry to start, and he stayed still. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. Yesin 4 realized his stylus was hovering above his tablet without touching it. Then Ven opened his carry case. What he took out was not dramatic. A physical document binder, the kind Earth still used for archival records, a format most species had dropped 2 or 3 generations back. Dark blue synthetic fabric, brass-colored clasps, 3.4 centimeters thick, which Yesin 4 estimated because he had a habit of estimating dimensions without being asked. Ven placed it on the table. He set both hands flat on top of it. He did not stand. "Counselor Drevath," he said. His voice was flat in the way long-range radio communication was flat, not empty, but stripped of everything that was not information. "I would like to respond to the concern about the 214 queries." He aligned the binder by 2 centimeters against the table's edge. A small, quiet adjustment, the movement of a man who needed things square before he started. Then he opened it. "Query 1 through 19, Ven said, concerned signal relay placement in subsectors 7 through 12 of the Varath outer band. He read without searching. He had read this before, many times. He was reading it now for someone else. The treaty's current language places those relay installations 340 kilometers inside the debris field boundary, set by the Lethian Environmental Accord of 2847. That accord carries council-protected status. Building inside that boundary without a formal variance would expose every signatory to a secondary tribunal review within about 18 months of construction start. He turned one page. Yesin 4 looked across the horseshoe. 3 delegations had pulled their screens closer. The Lethian delegation, mid-tier left, had gone very still, not the frozen stillness of the earlier discomfort, but the tighter stillness of people who had just heard their own name somewhere they were not expecting it. The Lethian Environmental Accord, their accord. Dreveth had not moved. Queries 20 through 41, Ven continued, concerned the dormancy protocol in Clause 11. The treaty uses the phrase operational pause without a defined time limit. Under Keth commercial law, which the treaty invokes by reference in Clause 9, an undefined operational pause becomes a legal permanent shutdown after 7 standard years. Another page turn, quiet, unhurried. Earth operates 3 relay stations under the treaty's retroactive scope. Under the current language, those stations would be classified as permanently shut and eligible for third-party claims 7 years, 4 months, and about 19 days from today's ratification date. 31 delegations, each running their own math now. Not the same math, their own. Yesin 4 could see it in the room, the small shifts in posture, screens pulled a few centimeters closer, heads tilted fractionally toward neighbors. Each delegation checking the treaty's language against their own infrastructure, each one looking for the phrase operational pause in their own station records. Dreveth still said nothing. Yesin 4 stylus had not touched his tablet since Ven opened the binder. Ven turned another page and did not look up. I have 173 more. The chamber changed when he said it. Not visibly. No one stood. No one spoke. But the air in the room shifted the way pressure shifts before weather not felt on the skin yet but felt somewhere lower. 173 more pages was not a rebuttal, not a counter-argument, not the formal objection Dreveth had been expecting, which would have opened a process and given the Keth something to manage. 173 more pages was a different kind of document entirely. Yesin 4 understood something then that he would write about later, not in his session log, but in the personal record he kept on a different tablet, the one he did not submit to the Secretariat. 214 queries, submitted one at a time over 9 months, looked like confusion or obstruction. That was what they had looked like when he read the log the previous night. That was almost certainly what they had looked like to every delegation that had glanced at the query counter and moved on. One binder, opened in session, containing all 214 in sequence with their consequences mapped and their legal citations precise. That was something else. That was a record. That was 9 months of reading every word of a document that 30 delegations had reviewed in 11 days, and finding, on average, slightly more than 7 problems per query series, and choosing the slower, more careful path of asking rather than objecting. He looked at Dreveth. One of Dreveth's aides had both hands flat on his data tablet, still, not scrolling, reading something. His posture had changed in the last few minutes. The specific change Yesin 4 associated with a person who had found a number and was checking it against a second number, and did not like what the 2 numbers were doing together. Yesin 4 pressed his stylus to his tablet for the first time since Ven began. He wrote Session 213, "Something is happening." Queries 42 through 58, Ven said, concerned the jurisdictional overlap between the treaty's maintenance corridor definitions and the outer band agreements under the Varath Compact of 2791. Page 47. He had found it without searching. The Varath Compact grants prior claim to maintenance access routes in the outer 7 subsectors. The treaty's corridor definitions in Clause 4 overlap with 3 of those routes at a combined length of about 14,000 kilometers. Without a priority amendment, any maintenance performed in those corridors after ratification would be in technical breach of the compact. The Hevari delegation, mid-tier right, made a brief involuntary sound, not words, just the short, throat-based noise Yesin 4 had learned to associate with Hevari receiving unwelcome information. Ven did not react. He turned the page. The energy in the room had changed. At its surface, the session was still orderly. No one had called a point of order. No one had interrupted. The chair had not spoken since the opening formality. But beneath that surface, 31 delegations were recalculating everything they believed about a treaty most of them had approved months ago. The recalculation was visible if you knew where to look. Yes and 4 had been in enough sessions to know. Screens pulled closer to bodies. Heads tilted toward neighbors. One delegate from the Sarvan collective, who had been resting one arm loose on the podium edge, now had both arms flat on the surface in Sarvan body language, a signal of full attention rather than passive presence. And then, at the floor-level podium, kept turning pages. One query series at a time, each one with a specific number range, each one with a clause cited by number, each one with a consequence stated plainly. This treaty says this, and this other document says something different, and here is what happens when both things are true at the same time. He had not raised his voice. He had not looked at Drevath. He had not used the words mistake or error or flaw. He had said, the treaty says this and the record says that, and the math runs like so. Yes and 4 had stopped writing in shorthand. He was writing full sentences, quickly, the way he had written as a student when he was afraid of forgetting something. His record of session 213 was already longer than his record of any prior session. 40 more pages. Then 20. Then Vin set one hand flat on the last page and paused. Under 3 seconds. The pause of a man checking his final line before he stopped. He closed the binder. Not with weight, not with emphasis. He closed it the way a person closes something they have already finished reading, flat, clean, one clasp pressed down and then the other, the small double click of brass catching. He set both hands on top of it. I have been submitting these queries through the procedural system, he said, because that is the correct process. 2 seconds, the pause of a man choosing his next sentence carefully. I could have submitted them as a single formal objection in month 1. A formal objection would have frozen the treaty pending full legal review. That process takes, on average, 4.2 years. His voice did not change. I did not do that. I asked questions. I was trying to help the treaty pass. The chamber was very quiet. Yes and 4 pressed his stylus to his tablet. The silence that followed was 11 seconds long. He counted. The silence had 11 seconds in it. Yes and 4 was on 6 when Councillor Meyerth of the Lethian Assembly finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, aimed, not at the room, at Drevath specifically, the way you aim something when you want only one person to feel its weight. I think we owe the human delegation a recess. 7-8. Yes and 4 kept counting after she spoke. He did not know why. The silence had already been broken, but the counting had become something separate from the silence, a record, a measurement, a way of marking that this moment had a specific length and that the length mattered. 9, 10, 11. He stopped. He looked at his tablet. He had written 4 words since Ven opened the binder. Session 213. Something is happening. Below that, nothing. 4 minutes of watching a man read from a dark blue document binder, and all Yes and 4 had managed was 4 words. He had attended 212 sessions before this one. He had never in 6 years of service stopped writing long enough to realize he had stopped. Ven nodded once. He folded his hands on top of the closed binder and waited. He did not look at Meyerth. He did not look at Drevath. He looked at the center of the horseshoe with the same patient, forward attention he had maintained since the session opened, the look of a man who has finished the work he came to do and is now simply present while the room catches up. His 2 aides behind him had not moved. The carry case beside his chair was still open. He had not reached into it again after taking out the binder, whatever else it contained, and Yes and 4 found himself wondering, for the first time, what else it might contain had stayed inside. Across the horseshoe, Drevath had not spoken since his 3 prepared sentences and their 3 placed pauses. He sat at the top tier, elevated by architecture and seniority, and he was doing something with his hands that Yes and 4 had never seen a Keth senior delegate do in session. Nothing. No screen. No aid consultation. No small procedural gesture that signaled authority in motion. His hands were flat on his podium surface, and he was looking at Aurelio Ven. Not at the binder, at Ven. The chair called the recess. 20 minutes. Yes and 4 stayed in the gallery. He was not required to. Clerks typically used recesses for notation, review, and refreshment. He pressed his stylus to his tablet and began writing properly, in full sentences, the way he had trained himself not to do in session, because full sentences took too long and he always fell behind. He did not fall behind. There was no session to keep up with. There was only what had happened in the last 43 minutes, and he wanted to get it down before any part of it became less clear. He wrote the number first, 214. Then he submitted them one at a time, over 9 months, through the correct channel, each one answered or not answered, logged, archived, unremarkable in isolation. Together they are something else. I do not have the right word for what they are together. He stopped, read it back, crossed out I do not have the right word and wrote, together they are a record. In the chamber below, delegations were not using the recess for refreshment either. 3 clusters had formed in the horseshoe, not by species alliance, which was the usual pattern, but by infrastructure position. The Hevari and the Orith were speaking quietly to each other across their podiums. 2 mid-tier delegations, Yesin 4 still needed to check the names of were running their screens side by side, one delegate pointing at something on the other's display. The Lethian delegation had not moved from their seats at all. Councillor Myrth was reading something on her screen with the focused, unhurried attention of a person who already knows what they are going to find and is reading to confirm it. Drevath's aide, the one who had gone still over his data tablet during Ven's reading, was now standing slightly behind Drevath's chair, speaking in a low, rapid tone. Drevath was listening without turning. His upper body had the angle Yesin 4 associated with Keth concentration. Forward 2 degrees, arms close, the posture of receiving bad information and processing it without letting the processing show on the outside. He was not looking at Ven anymore. Ven had not stood during the recess. He was still at his floor-level podium, reading from something in the binder that he had already read, running a finger along a line, checking something. His 2 aides were speaking quietly beside him. One of them handed him a small cup. He drank from it without looking up from the page. Yesin 4 wrote, "He drinks the way people drink when the drink is not important. The cup is not important. The page is." The recess ended. The chair called the session back to order. No declaration, no counterargument, no motion from the Keth podium. Drevath spoke once briefly, in the flat standard his translator produced. The Keth sovereignty requests that the ratification vote be postponed pending review of the procedural record. That was all. Yesin 4 wrote it down. He wrote it down very carefully, spacing each word. The chair acknowledged the request, noted it in the session record, and asked if any other delegation wished to speak before adjournment. 3 delegations registered brief statements, procedural, careful, none of them mentioning the human delegation or the binder or the 214 queries by name. The Hevari delegate used the phrase full institutional review twice. The Orith delegate mentioned the importance of comprehensive legal mapping before major ratification. The mid-tier delegation, whose name Yesin 4 finally located, the Sevari Combine, said only that they looked forward to a revised framework. None of them looked at Drevath when they spoke. Councillor Myrth of the Lethian Assembly did not speak again. She did not need to. Ven nodded once more when the adjournment was called. He closed the binder, it was already closed, had been since before the recess, and placed it in his carry case. He fastened the carry case. He spoke briefly to his 2 aides, something Yesin 4 could not hear from the gallery, and one of the aides made a notation on their screen. Then Ven stood up. It was the first time he had stood since the session opened. He was not a tall man. Standing, at the floor-level podium, he was still lower than every other senior delegate in the room. The room had been built that way. The vote had been 22-4 with 5 abstaining, 61 years ago, and the basalt floor of the human podium was still 3 steps below the next lowest tier. He picked up the carry case. He nodded to his aides. He walked toward the chamber's side exit at the same pace a person uses when they are done with the thing they came to do and are ready to begin the next thing. He did not look back. Drevath remained in his seat for 6 minutes after the adjournment was called. Yesin 4 noted the time. He noted it the way he noted all things in the session log: date, duration, observation. But this one he marked with a small asterisk, which was his personal notation for this will matter later, though I cannot yet say how. The two aides flanking Drevath were both working their screens now, not quickly, carefully, in the way people work when they are looking for something specific and are not sure how much of it they will find. Drevath stood at the 6-minute mark. He did not speak to his aides. He walked to the chamber exit at the top tier, which was the exit used by founding species senior delegates, because it let out on the upper corridor, closer to the private meeting rooms, further from the general diplomatic ring. He did not take the upper corridor exit. He took the main floor exit. Yesen 4 watched him cross the chamber floor from the top tier down 3 flights of basalt steps to the main level, the same level where the human podium sat. He watched Drevath pass the floor-level podium without stopping, without looking at it, and walk out through the main doors. He wrote, "The Keth sovereignty has held the top-tier position for 312 years. Today their senior delegate left through the floor-level exit. I do not know if he chose it or if his aides directed him there because the upper corridor was occupied. I have noted it either way. The legal review took 7 months. Not the 4.2 years Venn had named as the cost of a formal first-month objection. 7 months, because the treaty had already been through initial review by 30 delegations, and because the identified issues had specific clause numbers and specific legal citations, which made the review faster than starting from nothing. Faster, but not fast enough for the Keth fiscal cycle. The Keth sovereignty cycle closed 14 days after session 1847. The revised treaty was not ratified until 7 months later. The infrastructure expansion the Keth had planned to begin in the first quarter of the following year was delayed. The contracts they had arranged with 3 construction firms in the outer sectors were renegotiated at the new timeline. The financial consequence was not catastrophic. It was significant, specific, and entirely the result of a treaty that had moved too fast through a ratification process that the Keth had designed. Yesen 4 found this out later from public financial filings, the way he found out most things by reading. The revised treaty was ratified in session 1914, 67 sessions later. It had 31 amendments, 29 of them traced directly to the 214 queries. Yesen 4 read the amendment record on the afternoon of the ratification. He sat in the gallery of the same chamber in the same seat, with his tablet on his knee and his stylus in his hand. The session was procedural, brief. A ratification vote on a revised document that 32 delegations had now reviewed at full depth, with specialists, over 7 months. The vote was 32-0. He looked at the human podium during the vote, floor level, black basalt, same position it had always been. No one had proposed moving it. He did not write that down. He thought about it for a moment and then moved on to the next item in his notation. Aurelio Venn attended session 1914. He sat at the floor-level podium. He voted yes with the others. He did not speak. He left Verath Station 4 months later at the end of his appointment term. There was a small departure reception in one of the lower-level meeting rooms. Yesen 4 did not attend, but he saw the attendance record, which was his job. 11 delegations sent representatives. 3 sent senior staff. The Lethian delegation sent Councillor Meyerth herself, which Yesen 4 noted in his personal record with no comment, because the fact was sufficient on its own. Venn returned to Earth. He did not give a speech on the way out. He had one interview, published in a small Earth-based infrastructure journal that Yesen 4 found 14 months after the fact while reading through a diplomatic archive that included press materials from member species publications. The journal had a modest readership. The interview was 3 pages. Most of it covered his career in the Outer Belt Authority, the supply logistics work, the asteroid mining operations. Near the end, the interviewer asked him what his strategy had been. Venn's answer was 4 words. I just read the documents. Yesen 4 read the interview twice. He printed it, which was unusual for him. He kept almost everything in digital notation. He folded the printed pages and put them in the back of his session log for the year, behind his record of session 213. He did not know why he printed it. Or rather, he did know. He just did not write it down. Session 213 was the longest entry in 6 years of notation. He had gone back to it 3 times since that day. Once to add a correction about the Hivari delegate's name, which he had initially spelled wrong. Once to add a note about the Keth fiscal filings when they became public. And once, on the afternoon of session 1914's ratification vote, to add a final line. The line read, "The revised treaty passed today. 29 of the 31 amendments are numbered. The numbers match the query log." He saved the entry. He closed the file. He set his stylus down flat on the table beside his tablet, which was a habit he had developed sometime in the last 14 months, setting things down flat when he was finished with them, parallel to the table's edge. The way a person does when they are done with something and want the fact of being done to be visible. He did not know when he had started doing that. In the records room on the 3rd sublevel of Verath Station, in a physical archive that most species had stopped using 2 generations back, there was a single entry under Earth Delegation. Session 1847. 1 document binder, dark blue synthetic fabric, brass-colored clasps, filed under Procedural Submissions Complete Record, 3.4 centimeters thick. Inside, 214 questions, numbered in order, each one asking the Council to look at something it had not looked at closely enough. The archive entry listed the document's current status as incorporated. See Treaty Amendments 129, ratified session 1914. The binder itself sat on the shelf the way things sit when no one needs them anymore, not forgotten, not honored, just present. Its clasps had gone slightly dull from handling. The fabric was the same dark blue it had always been. On the shelf above it, 312 years of Keth Treaty records, each one in the integrated data format the Council had used for as long as anyone current could remember. On the shelf below it, nothing yet. The space was empty.